Hello, and welcome to Blades and Banners, a Tales of the Valiant actual play set in the Eberron campaign world. It's Friday, and so I'm back with another ship's log. This one's again going to be just me. I want to talk about something that I kind of intended to get into in the last ship's log, but just what didn't have time to quite prepare for it. And that has to do with the running of a Sandbox campaign. I'm not sure I can reasonably call Blades and Banners a complete Sandbox campaign, but I certainly intend it to be a little bit that way. It will kind of depend on how much I can get the players to seize the initiative from me, or whether they continue to, wait for missions to come. Either one's fine. We'll see. But they've got a ship, so I should at the very least be prepared for them to decide to go really anywhere within certain reason uh, in the Lazar principalities. So, how do you do that without having to create a vastly detailed uh, world with complete knowledge of every possible location that the players might go? Now, if that's your approach, that you want to just go ahead and create every single location in the most detail you possibly can, more power to you. There are plenty of people who love that kind of world building, and I kind of love that kind of world building. But I have found that that kind of depth sometimes leads me to be unprepared when the players think of that thing that I didn't expect. And so I want to talk about a slightly slimmed down version of that kind of preparation that's a little more approachable. Especially, this is very approachable for people who are wanting to start their own first campaign. Maybe you've run a couple of pre created adventures and you want to dive into your own setting or your own campaign in a pre existing setting. And you want to give the players a little bit of freedom and agency, but you don't want to overwhelm yourself by having to know every bit of lore within 1,000 miles of the starting point. So how can we do that? And so I want to introduce you to this thing that I'm not claiming to be the first person to come up with this. I may have seen it somewhere. I looked around and I couldn't find a place where I had seen it before, but this is something that I do, and I call it plot mapping. So I have a couple of examples of ways to approach this. Um, so first of all, let me show you what a simple plot map would look like. So I'm going to throw this up on the screen here. What you're looking at is a tier 1 plot map. So if we're playing in a D20 system, this is a plot map that I would say is probably good for levels 1 through 5, maybe a little less. It kind of depends on the direction that your players want to go. So the goal here is for you to not need to know everything at once. All you really need to know well is the details for the location the players are going to be in the next setting. So I've created this off of nothing. This is not from a campaign I'm running. This is just some things I threw onto a board, and it should serve for our purposes, because obviously I don't want to show you my plot map for Blades and Banners. So we have a starting location. Classic fantasy, I've set it as a starting village, and I've given 3 problems that are going on in that village. Aggressive wolves, there's a grain shortage, and there are bandit scouts that have been in the area. So for this purpose, to begin the story, you need to know the village really well. It needs to be populated with NPCs. I strongly recommend getting your players to help you populate it with NPCs. But regardless of how you do it, it needs to be populated with NPCs. You need to be very familiar with the village. And you need to know what the encounters would be like for these 3 problems. You need to have the details of these 3 problems as they currently appear in the village. You don't necessarily need to know all the details of the problems. You need to know how the problems are affecting the village right now. And probably one or another of these problems is going to hook the player's interest more than the others, and they're going to set out to try and solve it. So right here, you've almost certainly got a session. You've got your village. You can set up the problem that the village is dealing with a grain shortage, and you can introduce, or perhaps they're pre-existing, the two problems of bandit scouts and aggressive wolves. Maybe the bandit scouts are part of the problem with the grain shortage. They are attacking and have stolen from the silos, or maybe the wolves are coming into the fields and preventing the harvests from being pulled in. Maybe these things connect to each other, but there's a grain shortage. That's the ongoing crisis of the village. It's not, I don't usually start with everything's fine in the village. I usually start with there is a current problem. And then I've got a couple of encounters that can happen. Some bandit scouts can come in, or maybe we can chase down some bandit scouts. Maybe the wolves are so aggressive that they come running into the village and attack people in the streets. That's really uncommon. So that should alert everyone to something's very wrong. So, based on what your players hook into, is going to kind of determine where they're going to head next. And what I would do is I would take my map of my basic area. And if you don't draw maps, there are so many people who've created little maps of fantasy areas that you could just plop your own labels onto. Or honestly, I love maps and I usually provide maps to my players because I like maps. You don't need to. This that you're looking at on my screen is enough of a map. It has rough geographic directions. You could scribble in some forests, some trees around the forest. You could scribble in some hills around the mine. You could make a marker for the town. You could draw some rivers on here if you want to, but you don't need to. That adds color. It adds interest. Some players really like doing it. Maybe one of your players wants to do it. You've got enough right here. This is a good enough map. So you know what's within reasonable travel distance of the village. What is the village life aware of? The village life is almost certainly aware of a market town because people in the village have to take their stuff to market somewhere. It's a fantasy world, so there need to be a couple of slightly mysterious and dangerous locations. An abandoned mine, which could just as easily be a ruined tower or something like that, and a dark forest. And then somewhere off in the distance, probably most of the villagers have never even been there, is the big city. And we're going to start in the village. I'm going to introduce these problems. And then let's say the players are going to hook into the aggressive wolves. Well, I know from the start that the aggressive wolves leads to the dark forest. And I've jotted down some notes of things I think are interesting in the dark forest. There's an angry dryad. There's a wounded unicorn. There's some sort of activity with the Fey court. And there are some elvish ruins. When I start session one, I don't need to know anything about any of those things. I just need to have those little notes scribbled down there of things I think it would be cool if they were in the forest. Nobody in the village needs to know about those things yet. Maybe there are rumors. If I've got something that I want to particularly draw my players' attention to, maybe I can introduce some sort of rumor about one of these things, but I don't need the details. I really want to make that clear. I don't need the details. Once my players have gotten interested in the aggressive wolves, now I know we're heading towards the dark forest. And so between this session and the next one, I need to fill out the dark forest. I need to know what's going on in the dark forest. I need to know why the dryad is angry. And I've got it color coded on this map because I decided genuinely while I was making this 15 minutes ago that the angry dryad is the cause of the aggressive wolves. So I need to find out why the dryad is angry. There's a wounded unicorn, and I currently don't know what caused that to happen or why it's important. Maybe there's poachers. Maybe someone from the village has been poaching in the forest and wounded the unicorn, and that's why the dryad is angry. I don't know. Maybe the dryad was incited by the Fey court, or maybe the Fey court and the wounded unicorn are just, by the way, encounters while they're exploring the forest and trying to figure out what's going on here. Maybe the wounded unicorn and the Fey court have information that will help them find the angry dryad. The wounded unicorn is saved by the party. Maybe it will grant them a boon. Maybe it knows the secret about the angry dryad. Maybe it can teach them how to pacify the angry dryad. Or maybe they're going to have to fight the angry dryad. Maybe something's terribly wrong. Maybe it's infected by something from a dark side of the Fey court. Don't know. Maybe something is infecting it that's lurking in those elven ruins, and it's going to carry us further. I don't know all that yet. I'm going to work on that after session one, where we're in the village, or maybe session two, depending on how long we're in the starting village. I'm going to work on that between the session where we leave the village and the session where we get to the forest. Now, what do I do if the players get really aggressive and they decide to leave the village while the session is still ongoing, while they're still, for our agreed upon playtime, there's still a couple of hours left. Not to worry, you have to travel. And so traveling between these places, now again, in some settings, travel's really easy and it might seem like you're not going to have this opportunity. But even in a place like Eberron, where there are trains, you can still have this kind of thing. I just need a road encounter, something to slow them down, something to make it so that they aren't going to get to the forest before the session where I'm ready for them to be in the forest. So they're on their way to the road, on their way to the forest. So I throw in a road encounter. Maybe it's related. Maybe there's more wolves. Maybe this one's got a dire wolf or something like that. Maybe there are some elves who don't like people to disturb the forest, and they're going to have to negotiate or fight their way past them. Maybe it's just a local farmer who lives between the village and the forest needs some help with something. Someone's stolen some of his livestock, and they're going to go track it down. That's kind of where I'm looking at. Maybe they get interested in the bandit scouts. That takes them to the abandoned mine. They get focused on the grain shortage. Probably they're going to want to focus on the grain shortage eventually, because that's a existential threat to their village, and that's going to lead them towards the market town. Once they're on their way to the market town, which is my intention by this map, because the grain shortage is an existential threat, so maybe they'll go to the forest first, maybe they'll go to the mine. But once we're done in the starting village, we're going to head towards the market town because the world is going to get bigger. The market town is probably a place that they're going to go when they are level 2, maybe level 3. Maybe the market town is where they're, if we're playing D20, maybe the market town is where they're going to pick up their subclasses. On the way to the market town, I want a road encounter. And this one I've planned specifically as a collector patrol. I've got this idea that there are tax collectors working for the corrupt mayor in the big city who are trying to impose their will on the local communities around here. And so I want to sort of foreshadow that. So along the way towards the market town, I want them to encounter a patrol of these collectors who are going to try and shake them down for some money. If depending on the kind of setting I want this to be, will depend on how significant an encounter this is. If I want them to feel the powerlessness that the average villager feels in the face of this kind of corruption, then I'll make these collectors high level. I'll make them significant threats so that the party might be inclined to hand over some money to allow themselves to be shaken down, let them feel that frustration. On the other hand, if I'm going for a little more swashbuckling adventure, and I want the players to feel more like Robin Hood, then I'm going to make these collectors a reasonable threat, an on-level threat that they can have an interesting encounter with, or chase them off, or intimidate them, or something like that. Maybe that's a Three Musketeers kind of thing, and they chase them off, but the captain has seen them and is going to be their nemesis. He's going to be a recurring villain when they get to the market town and they find out that these guys have connections. But I have a planned thing that's going to foreshadow a problem in the market town. We're going to get to the market town. We're going to discover that part of the grain shortage is due to a black market that's been going on. And these gangs that have been roving around and stealing, maybe those bandits that they thought stole from the silos weren't actually the culprits. Instead, it's this black market gang that's been stealing grain and selling it secretly to somewhere else that I don't know about yet. If they get really interested in investigating that gang, I need to expand my map and figure out where that leads. My point, as you can kind of see, is this. My starter map is just the things that my party can easily get to. It's just the areas my party can easily get to. And this can scale for anything. If we're doing an urban campaign that's all in the same big city, then these are neighborhoods instead of towns. But it amounts to the same thing. If we're in a place where travel is a lot easier, like Eberron, then maybe this map represents a larger geographic region, but I can still have a train heist. I can still have a crashed airship. I can still have things that they need to stop and check out along the roads. So what I want is a few places where I've jotted down some interesting notes. I want details about the place where we're going to be in the next session or two. And then once they've picked a place that they're going, I need to flesh that place out. But I don't have to have all of it fleshed out ahead of time. I mean, I'm usually working on something D&D related in the back of my brain throughout my day. And so maybe while I'm going about my regular business, I start to flesh out other things. Here's the caution I would give you about doing that, about working too far ahead of the players in this kind of sandbox. If you work too far ahead of the players, you might fall in love with something, and then you're going to be tempted to pull the players in that direction. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but if you are trying to run a sandbox, you are trying to run one where you give the agency completely to the players. And I don't usually do that, but if that's what you want to do, then I encourage you not to work too far ahead. Have some big ideas, but not all the details yet. Uh, so this is kind of a rough sketch of it. I want to show you one that I've kind of done. This was I was just doing some world building. I didn't end up using very much of this. I used it in a little bit of a short-lived campaign, but this is an actual map I created in Incarnate. And then created it in Incarnate before I knew what any of the things on it were. All of these names and locations I didn't really know much about. I had a basic concept of the world, but beyond that, not much. Then I sat down, I was traveling, and I got out OneNote in my hotel room, pulled up this map, and then just took notes all over it. So I had this place that I liked the idea of called Emberhold that was a volcano. And I decided on the fly there must be an order of knights there, the Ember Knights or something like that. And their patron is a phoenix, and they protect travelers along the roads. There are these free cities down here that are old imperial settlements that are far enough south to avoid the attention of older dragons. Dragons were a big problem in this setting. There are these elven ruins that was the former cultural capital of the elves. And so these kinds of things were just there, and I just jotted down some notes. So if I was then going to run a campaign in this setting, I might decide where I want to start. So I might decide we're going to play Knights of Emberhold. And so I need to flesh out Emberhold, and I need to have a couple of problems that we can solve with an easy walking distance of Emberhold. And some of the problems that we're dealing with might lead us towards the Cinderwood and the Elven Ruins, or down towards the Free Cities, or this, that, or the other. So the idea of a plot map is it's just a really simple way to lay out a few sessions ahead of yourself where the campaign is going. It allows you to create a world somewhat on the fly and somewhat reactively to the players, which I really like doing. I really enjoy emergent storytelling. And so the way the players interact with the starting village and the dark forest is going to give me ideas for where things go. So maybe if the players get really into the dark forest, I forget about the market town and I expand my map off to the to that direction further beyond the dark forest, and we get into what's going on with the Fey court. What's the secret inside those elven ruins, and does that lead us somewhere else? On the abandoned map, I just wrote down Axe of Kinrock. I don't know what Kinrock is, or maybe who Kinrock is. I don't know anything about that axe. But if they decide to go to the abandoned mine, then that's something they're going to find that they're going to want to know more about. And once they've found it, they're too low a level to like cast legend lore or something like that. So probably they don't know anything about it. Maybe it becomes a part of the quest now to go and find out about this axe that they have found. I wrote down monster lair under abandoned mine. I don't know what the monster lair is yet. I don't know what the monster is. I've got a impressionist painting of most of the world, and I've got details about the place where we are. And I'm going to let the players tell me what's the next thing that needs to be colored in. What's the next thing that I need to flesh out the details of? And they're in charge of that. They're in charge of telling me where to go, and I'm going to flesh out the world as they travel. Now, this doesn't necessarily work very well if what you want is a campaign where you're going to start foreshadowing the big bad evil guy in level 1, unless you just decide what the big bad evil guy is and what their general goal is, and then you kind of insert the foreshadowing wherever the players go. That works fine. Modular bad guys is not a problem. You can insert the recurring villain anywhere you want. There's the one of my favorite pre-written adventures is called Whispers of the Vampire's Blade, and it has this delightful chart in there called Somebody Kicks Down the Door. And the intention of the adventure is that it's very fast paced. And so the advice from the author is anytime the players slow down, if the players slow down to start planning too much or start talking too much or the pace stalls out, have somebody kick down the door. Have some recurring villain, and it's got a little chart of who kicks down the door. So if you have your big bad guy planned, but you still want to do this kind of thing, that's fine. Some agent of your big bad guy is one of the options of who kicks down the door. That's a great thing to insert in road encounters. Or now we're going to the market town. Okay, where is one of the agents of my big bad guy in the market town, and what are they doing? And how subtle is it? Are they clearly the agents of a big bad guy? Maybe the players really, really targeted the lieutenant that was leading that collector patrol on the road to the market town. And so now I've decided that guy needs to be a recurring villain. And so I've made them an agent of my big bad guy so that they can become a recurring villain. The players can really grow to have this great rivalry with them. That happened in one of the first games I ran with Casey and RA. Is there was a serpent folk villain in the campaign, and I had him escape, and then I just started having him show up over and over again, and it became this. He was nothing really to the overall plot, but the players were absolutely dead set on killing him, and so it became this just kind of game between me and the players. I know, a game in an RPG. It became this game between me and the players where I would just stick him into situations. Like I just insert him into a town that they were in, and they'd run across him, and then there'd be this frantic combat. And my goal was always to have him cause some damage and then try to get away. And eventually they stopped him from getting away and killed him, and they felt great about it. But it was not really anything I planned from the start. But I folded him into some of the bigger plots just because the players were really, really engaged with it. So that's really what this is built around. It's built around the idea of letting what the players get into guide where you're going. You might ask yourself, what if the players get into something that I'm not very interested in? Well, there's kind of two ways to think about that. One is try not to put things you're not interested in on this map. And two is if you're kind of burnt out on the thing, bring a resolution to it. Think of what a satisfying resolution can be to that particular plot. The aggressive wolves take you to the angry dryad, and it doesn't need to be any farther than that. And the angry dryad doesn't need to be fixable, maybe. It's a corrupted dryad, it's gone evil, and they're going to have to fight it. And having fought the dryad, the aggressive wolves are no longer a problem, and it's resolved. If you're not into that story, then it doesn't need more steps, which is, again, another nice thing about this is because if you plot out this whole like 5-6 level arc involving that angry dryad, and then you realize that it's just not really working, it's easy to feel like you wasted that work. I don't know that creative work is ever wasted, but it's easy to feel like you wasted that time, and you might be frustrated by that. Letting the story emerge through player action using a map like this is a way to avoid that, because you're only a few steps. You're discovering the world alongside the players. And I really like that. And my experience, it's not necessarily going to be everybody's experience, but my experience is that discovering the world alongside my players is more fun for me and often results in me creating better things. Maybe my creativity just fires when I'm put on the spot in a particularly good way. But I've had really great results of things that I have created because I was put on the spot by a story thread that emerged because of what the players did. And that's kind of what this is built around. So I hope that's interesting to you. If it's not, then, don't use it. You play your game your way. But I know some people had been interested in how I was thinking about where the plots were in the Lazar Principalities, and it's kind of built around that. So we have some viewer questions. First from Darren. How do you deal with running a potion shop when players ask, what's available? How much did you have planned in advance? So for Abric Apothecary in the recent episode, I knew what the what the inventory was. I created an inventory for it and I gave it to the players in the Discord. There's probably a better way to do that, especially in the medium that we're in. Around the table, just handing them an inventory is not a problem, but when we're recording it for consumption, there's probably a better way to make that apparent to the audience. But I had completely pre-prepared that with things that were adaptations of real items for the most part, but which were kind of adjusted to seem more witchy, to kind of go with the theme. Um, if I'm having to create it in the moment, I I will honestly just try to improvise it. I'll either just grab an item I know exists in the rules, and put it there, or I'll try to make something up on the fly. You've always got the option of just, pulling out your rule book and pulling up a magic item that you want there, and that's usually what I do. It's not You could create a here's a bunch of what's available in the shop table and just roll on that a few times anytime they go into a shop that you're not prepared for. And that would be good. I'm not all that good at always having that kind of resource right to my hands. Darren also asks, do you have modular NPCs, events, or locations that you prepare in advance and use as needed, or do you have everything fixed to a particular location and time? I very rarely have anything fixed to a particular time, but I do have a lot of things fixed to particular locations. I've got some notes on every location within reasonable travel distance from the players right now. If they decided to go on a much longer voyage, I would need to create some things. But again, a much longer voyage, the voyage is probably going to take a session. And so I'll have some time, even if they surprise me by deciding, we want to sail down to Stormreach. I'll probably have a session that I can use on the voyage. And then before the next session, I can ready myself for the adventure part in Stormreach. So I have things mostly fixed. I have some modular encounters that I use as road encounters, but I don't have a lot of modular things that I'll just stick into a town unless it's agents of the big bad, or recurring villains. In Kyber Shards, the White Raven, Demise, um, Hallis Martain, these were all NPCs that I kind of throw into any place. When you're playing mostly in one city, it's a lot easier to do that. But, I have a few crews designed that I can throw in to any situation. The Wild Heart ship that almost attacked them in a couple episodes ago is an example of that sort of thing. And you can always have a ship show up. So recurring villains I will often use as modular encounters for wherever, because they can happen wherever. But mostly my locations are pinned to a particular location. Josh asks a related question. If when you do have limited availability adventure hooks, what's your preferred method for tracking when such things are or are not available? I really don't do limited availability adventure hooks much. When I do, it's usually more not really a tracker of time so much as events. At a certain point, an NPC is who's waiting for the players to go and rescue their missing loved one. At a certain point, it's probably too late, and I'll sometimes account for that, but I don't have a fixed way of doing it. It's more, okay, they ignored that, so the next time that they encounter it, the situation's probably worse. If I give them a plot hook that's time sensitive, I'll usually have some idea of, if they don't go, what are the consequences. So in Kyber Shards, they got asked to go rescue some people from Blackbriar, and they decided to spend a lot of time preparing and seeking information. Because they spent that much extra time, the situation when they got there was substantially worse than it would have been otherwise. That's kind of the example, but it's more to do with action than a particular time frame. I very rarely track time, in a game that I'm running. Mia asks, what suggestions might you have for someone who wants to GM a one shot for the very first time? Uh, I would suggest that you invite me to play. Um, Secondly, I would recommend using a pre written adventure. Um, for your first game, most systems have a starter box with an encounter, with an adventure that's very specifically written to teach the rules of the game. And usually it's also designed to teach the rules of the game to the person who's running the game. So if you are running a game for the first time, a starter box will usually show you how to play at the same time that it's showing your players how to play. So a starter box is a really, really good resource for a first time GM. If you are wanting to create your own adventure for your first one shot, and what I've said before hasn't talked you out of that, my recommendation would not be to not do that, to use something pre-written. But if you just really want to, and some people do, that's fine. Um, I would keep in mind that if you're running a D20 system, you are very unlikely to get more than 2 to 3 encounters, with 2 slightly more likely than 3, to be real honest. Your players are going to need some time to relax into things. They're going to probably spend more time than you think on something trivial, and combat takes a while in D20. If you're doing a different system, it's hard to advise you because different systems will allow for more or less to get done in a one shot. And then finally, my core piece of advice would be use Hero Kids. It's absolutely the best one shot system out there. It is very easy to teach, very easy to learn, very quick to play. You can get a whole lot done in an evening with with Hero Kids. So that would be my recommendation, and it's very available on Drive Through RPG. And if you want to see what it's like running a one shot, check out our Rebel Warriors one shot in Kyber Shards. It was a separated from the main campaign one shot using HeroForge that we played because we had a scheduling conflict and we just needed something to record. It was in the world of Kyber Shards, but not connected to the campaign. So even if you never watched Kyber Shards, you want to see what Hero Kids is like on the table, go check that out. It's I think it's hilarious. I think it's one of our better arcs. So that would be my final recommendation. Is that system is what I would use. You can get a lot more done, and you will spend a lot less time worrying about the rules. So, and there's a ton of pre-written adventures. So that's all of our questions, and that's all of my advice. Hopefully, that was interesting and useful to you. If you're interested in the story map idea, or if you've used something like it, let me know about it in the comments down below. What's your advice for a new GM running their first one shot? What's your favorite system to run a one shot in? And if you play D&D, which starter box do you think is the best? New episodes of Blades and Banners drop on Monday, new ships log on Friday. And until next time, thanks for rolling with us.